Let me ask you something. When two people go silent at the exact same moment, in the exact same relationship, does that mean they're finally on the same page? No. And this is where most people get it wrong, because silence is not a single language. Silence is a mirror, and it reflects back whatever's already living inside the person, experiencing it. Two people can stop talking on the very same day, walk away through the very same door, and still be having two completely different experiences. One is exhaling, the other is drowning, same event. Opposite realities. Here's what I mean. For the woman who leads with avoidance, and I want to be careful here, because we're not talking about a diagnosis, we're talking about a pattern. A survival strategy she likely built a long time ago. No contact often feels like coming home to herself. It feels like air after being underwater, not because she doesn't care, not because the connection meant nothing, but because closeness for her has historically been associated with a loss of self. So when the noise stops, when the demands stop, when the eye contact and the vulnerability and the expectation all stop, something in her nervous system settles. She's not punishing anyone, she's regulating. Now flip it. For the empath, the one wired to feel everything, to absorb the emotional temperature of the room before anyone even speaks, that same silence is not relief, it's abandonment. It's the sudden absence of the very thing his system runs on. Connection, feedback, resonance. He's not sitting in peace, he's sitting in grief. And here's the cruel irony. The quieter it gets, the louder his mind gets. He starts running the tape backwards, searching for the moment it broke, wondering if the love was ever as real as it felt. So understand this, they are not experiencing no contact. They're experiencing two entirely different psychological events that happen to share the same silence. And I want you to sit with that because it applies to more than romance. How many times in your life have you assumed that someone going quiet meant the same thing it would mean if you did it? We project our inner world onto other people's behavior constantly. We assume our meaning is the meaning. But meaning is not universal. Meaning is manufactured internally based on the architecture of the person experiencing the moment. This is the beginning of real emotional intelligence, not learning to read behavior, but learning to stop assuming your interpretation of that behavior is the only valid one. The avoidant woman's silence is not evidence of what she feels about him. It's evidence of what silence does for her. And the empath's silence is not proof he's moved on. It's proof of how much moving on is costing him. Because that's the truth underneath all human disconnection. We don't fall apart over what happened. We fall apart over what we decided it meant. And once you understand that the same quiet can be someone's peace and someone else's grief, you stop asking, why did they go silent? And you start asking the better question, what is silence doing for them? That single shift from judgment to curiosity is where every real transformation in human connection begins. Now let's go deeper. Because if you only understand that her silence feels different than his, you've understood the surface. You haven't understood the mechanism yet, and the mechanism is where the power is. Here's the question I want you to ask. What actually happens inside a person? Biologically, psychologically, in the moment they go quiet? Because most of us were taught to read silence as a message, a statement, a decision made in cold blood. She doesn't care. She's punishing me. She's done. But that interpretation assumes something that isn't true. It assumes the withdrawal is a choice made from clarity. And for someone wired toward avoidance, it almost never is. What's actually happening is something closer to a nervous system hitting its ceiling. Emotional closeness, real closeness, the kind that asks to be seen, the kind that requires dependency, activates something old in her. Long before this relationship, long before this partner, somewhere in her history, Closeness got wired to danger. Maybe it was inconsistency. Maybe it was engulfment. Maybe it was a caregiver who needed her more than they nurtured her. It doesn't matter which story built it. What matters is the wiring. Intimacy equals threat. And when a threat signal fires, the body does not deliberate. It deactivates. It pulls the plug. That's not cruelty. That's a survival response running on autopilot faster than conscious thought. So when she goes quiet, understand what you're actually witnessing. You are not witnessing her verdict on the relationship. You are witnessing her regulation of an internal alarm. The silence is not the message. The silence is the fire escape. And this is where I need you to make a distinction that will change how you see every relationship in your life. Intention and impact are not the same thing. The impact of her silence might be pain on the other end. That's real and it matters, and we're not dismissing that. But the intention behind it is not, let me hurt this person. The intention is, let me survive this feeling. Two completely different moral realities happening in the exact same behavior. This is the mistake almost everyone makes in love, in friendship, in business. In every relationship you will ever have, we assign motive based on our own pain, instead of investigating the actual architecture of the other person's response. We turn a nervous system reaction into a character indictment. And once we do that, we stop being curious. And the moment curiosity dies, the relationship dies with it. Because now you're not relating to a person, you're relating to a story you told yourself about that person. Here's what I want you to take from this. Deactivation is not deception. Withdrawal is not always rejection. Sometimes the person going quiet is not walking away from you. They are walking away from a feeling they don't yet have the tools to stay present with. That doesn't mean you owe them unlimited patience. It doesn't mean you absorb the cost of their unhealed history forever. But it does mean you can hold both truths at once. Her silence hurt you, and her silence was never really about you at all. It was about a war she's been fighting since long before you walked into the room. And once you can hold both of those truths without collapsing into either one, you stop reacting to the silence and you start understanding it. That is the exact moment you take your power back. Now let's turn to the other side of this equation. Because if we only examine her, we've told half the story, and half the story always distorts the truth. Let's talk about him, the empath, the one who feels the temperature of a room before a single word is spoken, the one who absorbs not by choice, but by design. And let's be honest about something most people get backwards. When he finally goes silent, when he finally stops reaching out, stops checking in, stops showing up, that is not the weak moment in his story. That is the strongest thing he has done in months. Because here's what nobody tells you about empathic people in relationships with someone who withdraws. They don't just feel their own pain, they feel yours too. They feel the distance before you even create it. They sense the shift in energy 3 days before the silence becomes official. And because they feel so much so early, so intensely, they overcompensate, they give more, they reach further. They try to emotionally regulate two nervous systems at once, theirs and yours, and they call it love, when really it's erosion, slow, invisible, self-erasing erosion. So when that kind of person finally goes quiet, understand what that silence actually costs. It is not indifference. It is the most expensive decision he has made in this entire relationship, because his instinct, his default wiring, is to move toward the pain, not away from it. Going no contact requires him to override his own nature. It requires him to stop being the emotional caretaker of someone who never asked him to carry that weight and rarely thanked him for it. This is the part I need you to really absorb. For an empath, withdrawal isn't the absence of love. It's the presence of self-respect, arriving late, but arriving. And here's the philosophical truth underneath all of it, because this is bigger than any one relationship. There's a version of love that looks like sacrifice, and there's a version of love that is actually self-abandonment, wearing sacrifice as a costume. For years, maybe his whole life, he's been taught that being the one who feels the most, gives the most, absorbs the most, that this makes him valuable, that this makes him the good one in the relationship. But love that requires you to disappear is not love. It's a transaction where only one party is paying. So when he finally goes silent, he is not punishing her, he's not playing a game. He is doing something far more radical. He is choosing his own nervous system survival over his habitual role as the emotional shock absorber for someone else's unhealed history. That is not coldness. That is the empath's version of the exact same instinct we just talked about in her, the instinct to protect the self. They are in this one narrow moment doing the same thing for entirely different reasons. And that's the piece that changes everything, isn't it? Her silence says, I need distance to feel safe. His silence says, I need distance to remember I exist. Two different wounds, two different histories, but for the first time, the same boundary. Because real growth is never about who reaches out first. Real growth is about a person who always gives, finally learning that his presence is not something to be earned back through more self-sacrifice. It's something to be offered only when it's met halfway. So now we have two people, both finally silent, both finally still, but for the first time, not moving toward each other and not moving away from each other either. And I want you to understand why that stillness is not empty. It is, in fact, the most important space in the entire relationship. Think about the dynamic that got them here. One pulls away, and the pulling away creates panic in the other. The panic triggers pursuit. The pursuit, the calling, the texting, the need for reassurance confirms the exact fear that made the first person pull away in the first place. See, closeness is suffocating. Closeness takes something from me. So she retreats further, which increases his panic, which increases his pursuit, round and round, faster and faster, until two people who may genuinely love each other are trapped in a machine neither of them designed and neither of them can find the off switch for. This is what psychologists call the pursue-withdraw cycle. And I want you to hear this clearly. It is not a conflict between two people. It is a conflict between two nervous systems on autopilot, each one reacting to the other's reaction, neither one actually present in the relationship anymore. They're not relating, they're reacting. And reaction, by definition, has no room for truth. It only has room for the next move in the pattern. So what happens when both of them go no contact at the same time? The machine stops. For the first time in the entire relationship, there is no pursuit to react to, and no withdrawal to panic about. And in that silence, in that absence of motion, something remarkable happens. Each of them is forced to sit alone with the one thing the cycle was always designed to help them: avoid themselves. This is where real information finally surfaces. Not the information generated by conflict, the accusations, the reassurance seeking, the arguments that go in circles. I mean, the quiet, uncomfortable, honest information that can only be heard when the noise stops. She may start to notice that the peace she feels isn't just relief. Some of it is loneliness she doesn't want to admit to. He may start to notice that the devastation he feels isn't just about her. Some of it is a pattern he's repeated with every partner who ever needed space. Here's the principle underneath this. Clarity does not live in the chaos of the cycle. Clarity lives in the space after the cycle stops. As long as two people are locked in pursuit and withdrawal, they are managing each other's emotions instead of examining their own. The moment that management stops, the moment nobody is available to chase or be chased, reality has nowhere left to hide. This is true far beyond romantic relationships, by the way. Every pattern you have ever repeated with another human being, the arguments that always end the same way, the friendships that circle the same wound, those patterns survive because they keep you busy reacting to someone else instead of confronting what's yours to own. So when you see two people go silent at the same time, don't assume it means the story is over. It might mean the story is finally being told honestly for the first time without a single distraction standing in the way. Silence isn't always the end of understanding. Sometimes it's the very first place understanding is allowed to begin. But here's what almost nobody tells you about this quiet space we just described. It isn't experienced on the same clock. And if you don't understand this one principle, everything we just built together will collapse the moment you apply it to real life. Time is not neutral. Time does not move through two people at the same speed. And in this dynamic specifically, the difference in emotional timelines isn't a small detail. It's the very thing that will determine whether this ends in reconciliation, resentment, or a reunion that repeats the exact same pattern all over again. Let's start with her. The woman who leads with avoidance typically needs distance before she can even access her own feelings, not because she's cold, but because proximity itself creates static. When someone is close, when someone is present, her system is too busy managing the perceived threat of closeness to do any honest reflection. So paradoxically, she often can't feel the truth of what the relationship meant to her until there is enough space for the alarm to go quiet. That processing might not happen in days, it might take weeks, sometimes months. And here's the part that matters most. She may not even be aware it's happening. Clarity, for her, often arrives quietly, almost accidentally, in a moment completely unrelated to the relationship. A song, a smell. An ordinary Tuesday, that's when the truth finally surfaces, long after everyone assumed the window had closed. Now, him, the empath, his processing engine runs differently. He doesn't need distance to feel the truth. He was already drowning in the truth before he even left. His awareness moves fast, sometimes too fast, because he spent the relationship monitoring every emotional shift in real time. So by the time he goes no contact, he has often already run the entire emotional autopsy. What went wrong? What he overgave, what he needs to change? He arrives at insight early, which means he is often standing at the finish line of his own healing, waiting, while she hasn't even left the starting block. And this is where good people sabotage good outcomes, because he interprets her silence through his own timeline. He thinks, it's been 3 weeks. If she cared, she'd have reached out by now. But 3 weeks in her nervous system might be the equivalent of 3 days in his. He is not wrong about his own timeline. He is wrong to assume it's the only timeline that exists. This is the deeper truth I want you to walk away with. Maturity is not measured by how fast you heal. Maturity is measured by whether you can honor someone else's timeline without abandoning your own. Boundaries in the process. You do not have to wait forever. You are allowed to have limits. But you also don't get to demand that another human being's nervous system operate on your schedule just because your schedule feels more urgent to you. The relationships that actually survive this kind of rupture are never the ones where both people heal at the same pace. They're the ones where each person learns to respect a pace that isn't their own without losing themselves in someone else's timeline and without forcing someone else to sprint through a process that was never built for speed. Because in the end, timing isn't the enemy of love. Impatience is. So let's bring this all the way home, because after all of this, the mismatched meaning of silence The nervous system running its ancient program, the empath finally choosing himself, the cycle finally breaking, the two clocks ticking at two different speeds. There's one question left standing, the only question that actually determines what happens next, not who texts first, not who breaks first, not who missed who more. I need you to let go of that question entirely because it's the wrong question and it always has been. The real question is this: what did each of them do with the silence? Because silence on its own changes nothing. Silence is not therapy. Distance is not growth. Time by itself heals nothing. I want to correct something you probably heard your whole life because it's a lie that keeps people stuck. Time does not heal all wounds. What heals wounds is what a person does with the time. Two people can spend the exact same 6 months apart. One spends it in genuine reflection, learning why closeness feels like danger, learning to tolerate being seen without dissolving. The other spends those same 6 months in distraction, numbing, or simply waiting for the discomfort to fade so they can return to the same patterns with the same results. Same silence, same duration, two entirely different outcomes waiting on the other side of it. This is where I need you to hear something important. Reconciliation was never the finish line. Reconciliation without transformation is just a delay. It's the same relationship, wearing a new outfit, walking back into the same room, waiting for the same collision to happen again because nothing that actually caused the rupture has changed. If she comes back the same, still deactivating the moment, intimacy asks something of her, and he comes back the same, still abandoning himself to keep the peace, then all they've done is pause the pattern. They haven't ended it. And patterns that get paused without being understood always resume, usually with more damage the second time, because now there's history reinforcing the wound. So the real work on her side is not stop being avoidant. It's learning to stay in her body when closeness activates the old alarm, to recognize that discomfort is not the same thing as danger, and that she can tolerate being fully seen without disappearing. And the real work on his side is not stop being an empath. His sensitivity was never the problem. The problem was using that sensitivity to manage someone else's nervous system instead of protecting his own boundaries. His work is learning that love does not require him to shrink his needs to keep someone else comfortable. Here's the philosophy I want you to leave this room with today. What happens next was never actually about the silence. It was never about who reaches out, who apologizes first, who breaks down and picks up the phone. What happens next depends entirely on whether either one of them uses this rupture as a mirror. Instead of a weapon, whether the silence becomes a place where they finally meet themselves or just another chapter in a story that keeps repeating because nobody stopped to read it. Because the relationship was never the real project. You were, and whether it ends or begins again, healthier this time, that will always come down to one thing, not what was said in the silence, but who each of you became inside of it. So let's come back to where we started. Two people, one relationship, the exact same silence. We've walked through 6 truths tonight. And I want you to notice something. Every single one of them points to the same underlying law of human connection. Nothing means what it appears to mean on the surface. Her peace was never simple relief. His grief was never simple weakness. Her withdrawal was never really about him. His silence was never really about giving up. The stillness between them wasn't the death of the relationship. It was the first honest room. Either of them had stood in for a very long time, and the clock ticking for each of them was never broken. It was just running on 2 different systems, built by 2 different histories, long before they ever met. If you take nothing else from tonight, take this. The quality of your relationships will never be determined by how loud your love is. It will be determined by how well you understand what silence is doing to the person standing across from you, and more importantly, what it's doing inside of you. Because here's the truth underneath all of it. You cannot fix what you refuse to understand. And you cannot love someone well from inside a story you made up about their pain instead of a real investigation into where that pain came from. So whether you are the one who pulls away when love gets too close, or the one who gives so much of yourself that you forget where you end and someone else begins, hear me clearly. The goal was never to become someone who doesn't need distance or someone who doesn't feel deeply. The goal is to become someone who can stay present, whole, unshaken, even when every old instinct is screaming at you to run or to rescue. That is not weakness. That is not codependence. That is not avoidance. That is mastery. And mastery is available to both of you, not in the moment you reach back out to each other, but in the moment you finally reach inward and meet the parts of yourself that this relationship was always trying to introduce you to. The silence was never your enemy. It was your invitation. The only question left is, what will you build inside it?